The dusty bus station. Exterior, bus station, afternoon. Late afternoon sun filters through the dusty windows of the bus station, creating streaks of gold across the worn tile floor. On a wooden bench near ticket counter 3, an elderly woman with silver hair waits patiently, her calloused hands resting on a small, cracked leather purse. Helen, 68 years old, has a face etched with the stories of a life lived with resilience. Her brown eyes, still bright despite the weariness, observes the bustling scene with the serenity of someone who has learned the art of waiting. She wears a simple navy blue cotton dress, clean and well-maintained, though small patches betray her modest means. Her black synthetic leather shoes are worn at the edges but meticulously polished. A dark wooden cane rests beside her, not just a physical support, but a silent witness to decades of hard labor in the city's factories, where she lost some mobility in her left leg in an accident that was never properly compensated. The terminal buzzes with the typical Friday afternoon rush. Busy executives shout into their phones. College students lug heavy backpacks, and families prepare for weekend getaways. Amidst this whirlwind, Helen remains almost invisible, as if the world has learned to look right through her. She arrived early to secure her ticket to the neighboring town, where she will visit her youngest daughter, who recently gave birth to her first grandchild. As she finally rises to approach the counter, carefully leaning on her cane, a group of teenagers waiting in the adjacent line bursts into laughter. One of them, a 16-year-old boy with unkempt hair and a band t-shirt, dramatically mimics her gait. The others join in the laughter, whispering comments that she pretends not to hear, but which pierce her heart like sharp knives. "Look at her. It'll take all day just to get to the counter," mutters a tall, thin girl with brightly colored glasses, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Helen stops for a moment, her grip tightening on her cane. Tears well up in her eyes, but she quickly blinks them back, taking a deep breath and continuing her journey. This isn't the first time she's faced this kind of situation, and she knows that responding will only make things worse. Over the years, she's learned that dignity sometimes manifests through silence, even when the heart cries out for justice. Around her, other passengers watch the scene with discomfort. A middle-aged woman averts her gaze, pretending to be engrossed in her phone. A man in a suit nervously adjusts his glasses, clearly disturbed but unable to act. A young mother discreetly pulls her small daughter away from the group of teenagers, whispering something in her ear about respecting elders. The ticket agent, a young man in his 20s, has also noticed the situation. His eyes dart between Helen and the teenagers, a growing expression of irritation on his face. When she finally reaches the counter, he greets her with exaggerated politeness, attempting to make up for the cruelty of others. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you?" he asks, his voice laced with a compassion she immediately recognizes. "I need a ticket to Oakhaven, please," Helen replies, her voice soft but firm. "The 5 p.m. departure, if possible." As the agent prepares the ticket, the teenagers continue their malicious comments, now also targeting the slow pace of the process. Helen's patience seems inexhaustible, but a close observer might notice the slight tremor in her hands and the way her lips compress, holding back words that will never be spoken. Then a deep, serene voice cuts through the air like a distant bell. "Can I ask what's going on here?" Everyone turned to see a man in his 50s, tall and imposing, wearing a crisp military uniform. His medals gleam subtly on his chest, and his steely blue-gray eyes carry a natural authority that immediately silenced the terminal. The teenagers exchange glances, suddenly aware of the weight of their actions. The boy who mimicked Helen gulps, while the girl with the colored glasses looks down. The colonel doesn't need to raise his voice. His mere presence has already transformed the atmosphere. "Ma'am," he says, addressing Helen directly, "I'd like to know if everything is all right. I noticed some people behaving inappropriately." Helen looked at him with surprise, unaccustomed to receiving defense from strangers. "Everything's fine, sir. Just waiting for my ticket." The colonel nods, but his eyes turn to the teenagers. "You," he says, his voice still calm but carrying an authority that makes everyone in the terminal pay attention. "Come closer, please." The youths hesitate, but the magnetic force of the man compels them to approach. He observes them for a long moment, his eyes scanning each face, reading the expressions of guilt and discomfort they try to hide. "I served my country for over 20 years, the colonel began, his voice echoing through the silent terminal. "I've been in places where humanity was tested to its limits. I've seen men and women face situations that would break most people. And in all those years, I learned a fundamental truth. The true strength of a people is not measured by how they treat their equals, but by how they treat their vulnerable." The teenagers remained motionless, each word penetrating their consciences like drops of water on dry earth. Around them, other passengers began to gather discreetly, forming a semicircle that witnessed this singular moment. "This lady," the colonel continued, gesturing respectfully toward Helen, "has likely worked harder in a week than you have in your entire lives. Her calloused hands tell tales of sacrifice. Her wrinkles are medals of honor, earned through perseverance. And you, who should be learning from her wisdom, choose to make her the object of your mockery?" The colonel's voice grew in intensity, but never lost his composure. "When I was on overseas missions, it was people like her who kept this country running. Mothers, grandmothers, tireless workers who supported their families while others defended our borders. They are the backbone of our society." Tears streamed down Helen's face, but these were tears of gratitude. No one had ever spoken about her this way. No one had ever publicly acknowledged the value of her existence. "I want you to approach this lady," the colonel said, his voice now softer but still carrying authority. "I want you to look into her eyes and see not a person to be ridiculed, but a living history of resilience and dignity." The teenagers approached hesitantly. The boy who had mimicked Helen was the first to look directly into her eyes, and what he saw there transformed him. "I promise I will be a better person because of this." "Don't make promises to me, son," she replied, gently touching his face. "Make promises to yourself and to the world. Be the change you want to see." As the bus pulled away, Helen waved from the window to the group that had formed on the platform. The colonel remained there until the vehicle disappeared over the horizon, his eyes thoughtful, his mind processing the extraordinary events of that afternoon. Weeks later, the colonel received a letter. It was from Helen, written in careful script, telling about her visit to her newborn grandson and how she had shared the story of the bus station with her family. She mentioned that the teenagers had sought her out in her neighborhood, offering help with her chores and asking for more life advice. The letter ended with a reflection that the colonel would cherish forever. "I've discovered that people aren't naturally cruel. They just sometimes forget that we are all human. All we need is someone to remind us of that fundamental truth. Thank you for being that person that day." The colonel carefully folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer next to his military medals. He knew that that letter was worth more than any decoration he had ever received, because it represented something that no military campaign could conquer: the genuine transformation of the human heart. Years passed, and the story of that day at the bus station spread through the town like ripples in a pond. Helen became a respected figure in her community, not because she sought recognition, but because her natural kindness inspired others to be better. The teenagers, now young adults, carried with them the lessons of that day, applying them to their own lives and relationships. The colonel, now retired, frequently visited the bus station, not because he needed to travel, but because it had become a personal symbol of transformation. He watched the passengers, always alert to situations that might require intervention, always ready to be the voice that would defend the defenseless. And so, an ordinary afternoon at a bus station became a legacy of hope, a reminder that, in a world often cruel and indifferent, there are still people willing to make a difference, that not all heroes wear uniforms or seek recognition, that sometimes the most courageous act is simply to stand beside those in need, offering not only protection but dignity. The story of Helen, the colonel, and the teenagers who learned to see beyond appearances continues to resonate in the hearts of those who know it, because some stories transcend their time and place, becoming beacons of hope that illuminate the path to a more compassionate world. And when the sun sets over the city, casting its last golden rays on the bus station, it is still possible to feel the echo of that transformative moment, an eternal reminder that kindness, once awakened, never quite sleeps again. It wasn't anger or resentment, but a deep sadness mixed with a compassion he couldn't comprehend. I'm sorry," the boy mumbled, his voice almost inaudible. "I didn't think. I didn't mean." "Thinking is exactly what you need to learn to do," the colonel interrupted gently. "Think before you act. Think about the consequences of your words. Think about the pain you can cause innocent people." The girl with the colorful glasses began to cry silently. "We're not bad people," she managed to say between sobs. "We just didn't think." "I know you're not bad people," the colonel replied, his voice now paternal. "But good people can do bad things when they don't reflect on their actions. The difference lies in acknowledging the mistake and choosing to be better." Then something unexpected happened. Helen, leaning on her cane, extended her free hand and gently touched the shoulder of the boy who had mimicked her. "It's all right, son," she said, her voice filled with a generosity that astonished everyone. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." Helen's simple gesture of forgiveness completely broke down the teenagers' defenses. They all began to cry, not just from shame, but from a sudden understanding of the magnitude of their cruelty and the undeserved kindness they were receiving in return. The colonel watched the scene with satisfaction, but it wasn't the satisfaction of victory, but of hope. "You have an opportunity now," he said. "An opportunity to turn this moment into something constructive. Don't let the shame you feel turn into forgetfulness. Use it as fuel to become better people." Meanwhile, the other passengers in the terminal began to react. The middle-aged woman who had averted her gaze approached Helen and offered her a tissue. The man in the suit removed his jacket and offered it to her so she could sit more comfortably. The young mother allowed her little daughter to approach Helen, who smiled and gently stroked the child's hair. What had begun as a moment of cruelty and indifference had transformed into a spontaneous demonstration of humanity and compassion. The terminal, once a place of haste and impersonality, had become a space of genuine connection between strangers. "You know," the colonel said, now addressing everyone present, "this kind of situation happens every day in our cities. Vulnerable people being disrespected, ignored, mistreated. And most of the time, we all look the other way, thinking it's not our responsibility to intervene." He paused, letting his words echo in the attentive silence. "But it is our responsibility. Each of us has the power to transform a moment of injustice into a lesson in humanity. Each of us can be the difference between cruelty and compassion." And here, let me pause the story to tell you something important. If you've come this far, if this story is touching your heart, it's because you also believe in the power of humanity. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell. because we need to spread more stories like this. We need to remind each other that kindness still exists, that compassion can still transform lives. Be part of this community that believes that small gestures can change the world. The colonel continued his reflection, now in a more personal tone. I've seen many battles in my military career, but I can tell you that the most important battles aren't fought with weapons or uniforms. They're fought every day in places like this, when we choose to defend the defenseless, when we choose to see humanity in every person we meet. Helen, who had listened in silence, slowly rose. "Sir Colonel," she said, her voice now firmer, "you've given me back something I had lost a long time ago, my faith in the goodness of people." "No, ma'am," the colonel replied, shaking his head. "I only revealed what was already there. Kindness has always been present. Sometimes it just needs to be awakened." One of the teenagers, the boy who had started the taunting, approached Helen again. "Ma'am," he said, his voice trembling, "I'd like to ask you a favor. Could you tell me your story? I want to understand better. I want to learn." Helen smiled, a smile that completely transformed her face. "Of course, son. I have time before my bus leaves." And so, there at the bus station, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, Helen began to share her story. She spoke of her years working in the factories, of how she raised 5 children alone after the untimely death of her husband, of how each scar on her hands represented a battle won for her family's survival. The teenagers listened with reverent attention, their perceptions of strength and courage completely reshaped. They discovered that the woman they had ridiculed had been a union organizer, had fought for workers' rights, had helped found a community daycare center that still operated in her neighborhood. "You know," Helen said, "I could have been angry with you. I could have held a grudge. But I've learned that life is too short to waste energy on negative feelings. I prefer to use my energy to help others grow." The colonel watched the scene with deep satisfaction. He had witnessed many situations where brute force or authority had resolved conflicts, but he had rarely seen such a genuine transformation as the one unfolding before him. "Colonel," said the girl with the colorful glasses, "how did you know you should intervene? How did you not just ignore it like everyone else was doing?" "Because," he replied, "there are moments in life when we are tested, moments when our true convictions are put to the test. We can choose to be cowards and look away, or we can choose to be courageous and make a difference. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's acting rightly despite fear." A woman who had watched the entire scene approached the group. "You know," she said, "I was here trying to pretend I didn't see what was happening. I felt ashamed, but I didn't know how to act. Now I understand that not acting is also a choice, and it wasn't the right choice." Other passengers began to join the conversation, each sharing reflections on similar situations they had witnessed or experienced. The terminal had transformed into a space of dialogue and reflection, where strangers connected through shared vulnerability. When it was finally time for Helen to board her bus, she was no longer alone. The teenagers insisted on escorting her to the platform, carrying her small luggage and ensuring she was comfortable. The colonel walked beside her, offering his arm for additional support. "Thank you," Helen said, addressing everyone around her. "You've turned what could have been one of the worst days of my life into one of the most special." The boy who had mimicked her approached one last time. "Mrs. Helen," he said, using the name she had shared during her story, "you changed my life today."